Hello. In this quick video, we're going to show how to use the Docker containers as part of the SanteMPI projects. Now, the Docker containers, or the Dockerization of SanteMPI, was actually undertaken as part of an initiative to integrate with Instant OpenHIE. And there are Instant OpenHIE scripts available on the Instant repository in the SanteDB community GitHub page. But we're not going to be using that interface today. We're going to just be spinning up a vanilla Docker environment with SanteMPI to illustrate how we spin up the Docker instance and how we can enroll the user interface so we have kind of a complete standalone MPI instance. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to clone the repository, which is the SanteMPI repository in our GitHub page. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to check out the develop branch because that has the newest versions of all the files. So we're going to make sure we're using the latest development version. And when I do a directory listing, you'll see that there's an instant folder here. And the instant folder contains kind of an instant environment for developers to use to validate or test SanteMPI. And I'm actually going to open up these two files in Visual Studio Code so we can see what these files contain. So the first file contains just the database service, which is PostgreSQL, as well as the latest MPI container image. And then, so you'd use this file if you just wanted like a headless environment. However, you can also use the Docker Compose UI file, which has the same two services for SanteDB and the underlying database. However, it also includes a packaged version of the web portal. So I'm going to actually compose the user interface app here. And to do that, I'm going to do a Docker compose. And we're going to use the UI file. And we're going to bring the container up. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to start up all the dependent services. And something you're going to want to do is ensure that the containers are all fully started up. This can take a little while on the first start because, as we can see here, the CDR is actually installing data sets from the image. And what we want to do is make sure that all our data sets are seeded into the database before we actually go ahead and try to connect to this. And if I open my Docker desktop here, I can see here I've got an app called Instant, and we've got our three containers here. I'm just going to make sure quickly that this is done starting up. So I can see here we've got application start audit, which indicates that this particular container is audited, that it is now ready to accept connections. So I go over to my Docker desktop. I can actually open the www browser. And what's going to happen is the container for the web UI is just a vanilla container. So it doesn't actually have any of the security enrollment data pre-seeded into it. And that's a security guard on the SanteDB iCDR. So what I have to do is I have to actually enroll my Docker device. So I'm going to give it a unique ID. So I'm just going to go, I'll name my device Hello World. and I want to connect to SanteDB MPI because I'm connecting, again, within my Docker instance. If you were actually doing this in production and your web server was running on a separate physical machine, you would actually then use the address of that physical machine. The rest of this we can actually leave the default just for our development environment. They're primarily used if you are in a production environment and as part of your production deployment you've changed the default application secrets. That's not the case with this particular Docker image. So I'm going to hit join domain, and I'm going to be asked to provide an administrative password. And this is, again, because we're modifying security settings. We're enrolling this container into the iCDR security realm. We want to actually make sure that we do that in a way that it has a user that's allowed to do that. So I'm going to press login. And after a few seconds, we'll get a welcome to the domain message, and I'll just hit OK. And then we have to select the role that this particular user interface portal will be playing in our environment. So in SanteDB world, the iCDR can actually host a variety of applications connecting to the same CDR. So for example, you could imagine you have an administrative portal, you might have an end user application, or you might have different applications playing different roles in the iCDR environment. So really what this screen is doing is it's asking us which role do we want this user interface to play. And this is going to be the master patient index role. And the next thing I have to do is I have to select automatically update applets. That's to instruct the server, or to instruct the client to actually download that particular package from the server. And the reason that this is not automatically checked off is depending on the deployment of the web portal or the disconnected gateway, because they use the same enrollment procedure, they might come canned with a particular set of user interfaces. So in the SanteDB SDK, there is a way to pre-package like an Android APK or a Windows installer with a disconnected gateway or a dedicated application. And that's why it's not automatically selected by default. So I'm going to hit next, and because I'm doing the web interface only, I'm going to use online only mode. The synchronized mode is actually used for the disconnected gateway. So if you need to use this offline as a cache of a subset of the server, you can do that in an offline manner and synchronize the data. But we're just going to sit with an online only mode. My log detail, I just want errors and warnings in the log. That's fine. Enabled services, we don't have any of these extra services that we need. Again, these services are if you want to, for example, enable Bluetooth peer-to-peer sharing of data within a clinic, or you just want to for doing pub/sub brokering, you can enable those services here. But we're not going to enable those because this is just a web interface. For optimization, again, this isn't really used for the web portal, but again, because the disconnected gateway uses the same setup procedure, I can just set this to a local network, and that will reduce kind of the server load, as it doesn't have to encrypt, or it doesn't have to compress the traffic going between the web portal and the server. And if you're using a developer proxy, for example, if you want to capture the traffic that's heading between the disconnected gateway or the web portal in this case and the iCDR, you can use any HTTP proxy such as Fiddler, or if you have another preferred proxy for debugging, you can use that. Hit next. SanteGuard, we don't receive syslog messages on the web portal. Again, that's a disconnected gateway feature. And then we also don't receive HL7 version 2 messages directly to the web portal. Those go to the iCDR. Again, if this was a disconnected gateway, this option would be enabled and allow you to set some HL7 version 2 receiver properties. And finally, we have some other settings. This is if you have a custom plugin or if it's a third-party plugin that needs a specific setting. You can add key value pairs here, but we're not going to set any of those. I'm just going to hit the finish. And I'll get this message that I need to restart the client service in order to complete the setup procedure. Now, I can either restart the entire Docker container, or I can just restart the individual www container here. And when I refresh this, just give it a little bit of time to start up. There we go. I can see now that the instance is already configured. So I'm just going to remove the configuration URL, and I should be prompted to log in. Now, you can log in with the default clinical user account of Allison, or you can use the administrator account and give yourself access to clinical data. So by default, SanteDB will not allow administrative users access to clinical data. So what I need to do is go into the security settings, and I can see here I've got groups, and go into the administrative group. And I can actually add a policy here that just gives administrators access to unrestricted clinical data. And I'm also going to put MDM permission. I'll give unrestricted MDM to administrator, just so my administrator has all of the features available. And I'm going to actually have to log out because part of the design of SanteDB is that each session is what is authenticated with permissions at time of establishment. Any permission changes, you have to log out and log back in to get a new set of effective permissions from the server. And now I can see that I have my MPI tab and my reference data tab. So if I click on the MPI tab, I'll get a empty dashboard because I don't have any patients registered. Now, if I want a quick way to put patients into this instance, in the SanteMPI project that you cloned from GitHub, there is a SoapUI project that you can import into your SoapUI instance. So if I go into the SanteMPI folder that I cloned, you'll see a SanteMPI test cases project that you can open. And this project has all of the Fire interfaces as well as the HDSI interfaces imported. And only the HDSI interfaces that are relevant for MPI. So what we can do actually is if I want to run like a Fire options request, I can actually just test that Fire is working properly by doing an options against the Fire endpoint. And I can see here that the Fire endpoint has kind of disclosed all of the functions that it supports. In the SoapUI test case, though, there is a PMIR test case or test suite, and these are growing. So far, we only include 5 of the tests, but I can actually just run these tests, and what it will do is it will actually test my Docker instance to make sure that it's behaving the way that is expected to behave. And if I come back over to my user interface and I refresh this, I'll be able to see now that I actually have patients in the MPI dashboard. And I should be able to open a patient here. And I'll see I have my MPI dashboard along with the master data management pieces. Now, this is the current version as of recording. There are, of course, bugs in the user interface. That's part of the work that's being undertaken, is to polish off the user interface. So do, of course, be conscientious that certain features within the user interface may not behave exactly as expected, and we are working on that. Finally, if you want to play around with the Fire interfaces, you can use the SoapUI interfaces. So for example, I can just expand, let's go for patients, we'll do a get. We do have to enable the authorization though. So in SoapUI, you can actually click on the Auth tab, click on SanteDB OAuth, and click on the Get Token option. And what this will do is authenticate the application for use with the SoapUI. And what we can do is, I'm just going to grab anybody whose family name is approximately anything. And I can actually run this. Let's go labels here. And I'll see that I have a response here of fire objects. And of course, I can change this into a JSON request by putting on an appropriate accept header. And then I'll get back the JSON representation of this object. Another option is to use the Swagger and OpenAPI endpoint, which is at API docs on port 8080. And what this does is it basically allows you to browse the different services that are enabled on the CDR. So you have, for example, the business intelligence service, the health data service interface, which is the internal API. You can also see here that we have the Fire interface. And I can authorize myself. So I'm going to use administrator. I'm going to use Allison. And the only trick to getting this to work is you have to use the client credential location in the request body. And you can see here there's a series of scopes that you can request. But I'm just going to leave those empty so it sends up a global scope, or the default scope. And if I find my patient resource here and I run a get, I can actually just try it out here. And if I run the same query as before, we'll get a response here inside of SoapUI, or inside of the OpenAPI or Swagger browser. And there you have it. You have an instance of SanteMPI running with the current development version. Thank you for watching.